I'm Anshika Varma. I run a small initiative out of New Delhi, actually, in India, called Offset Projects. And at Offset, we've been trying to look at encouraging ways of reading images, of engaging with images, of creating images. Um, Cheryl has nicely appeared there. Hi, Cheryl.
Hi.
Nice to see you wide awake at an insane hour, what I think,
I mean,
right?
it's not as insane as I thought. I think I should be waking up every day at this hour. My father would be so proud today.
Well, on that note, it's nice to see you ready with your kajal and your dupatta. And here in India today is actually Choti Diwali, so you seem quite festive and ready for that. you know.
Choti Diwali, but like I'm not wearing pants, so I guess it is festive.
Yeah, that's festive enough. I was just telling people who've joined us already about Offset a little bit, and you came just at the right time because I was getting to Guftgu. And
Mhm.
for those of you who are here, Guftgu is a series of talks that we'd initiated owing to very isolated living suddenly during the pandemic time. These were primarily artist talks that we used to have in physical proximity, and which would have been amazing because we would have gotten Cheryl to show us her prints and her book maybe if we were all sitting next to each other. But since that's not possible, we'll move to the next best thing and have you all stare at your screen while we stare at ours, right? Cheryl's joining us on a very, very early Friday morning.
I
Uh,
don't know how people do it. I see one of my friends here who also lives in New York, and I'm like, I don't know how people do this.
He's an amazing friend. That's what I'm going to say, right? And thank you because I get to somehow have this, not so direct conversation with her through you then, right? Um, to get right into it, we're going to talk to Cheryl today about some of her works in progress, some of the works that she's been executing out while in New York, and also a lot of questions that might have emerged relating to photography as a result of either the projects or other engagements that she's had over the years with the medium. I know you've had a pretty big shift in curve moving from from India to New York, and I mean both obviously personally, but it seems like also with how you started looking at images. And I think I'm very, very excited to debunk or rebunk maybe some of those ideas on this Friday the 13th.
Hmm.
Um, just to give you all a very brief introduction to Cheryl. Cheryl is a visual artist who's currently living and working in New York. She's in Brooklyn, if I'm not mistaken.
Hmm.
And she graduated with an MFA in Advanced Photographic Studies from the ICP BARD program there. She's also been a recipient of the Director's Fellowship at ICP that goes on until this year. And as I was saying that, I realized, well, we're nearing the end of this year.
I mean,
So,
it goes on until this year, but I graduated. So it goes on
right.
until I graduated and I did. So
Okay, so that's great. Great. She has a lot of interesting thoughts and questions with photography that you can find out if you stalk her on Instagram. And I've given you guys her IG handle for those of you who might not have it already. Welcome to the talk, Cheryl.
thank you.
So yes, let's get right down to it, and let's get to maybe probably the most recent biggest shift that you might have seen with the medium, which is moving from a particular exposure to photography, which you had while you were in India, moving to New York. And I mean, of course, that means there were a lot many other different changes that were happening in your life. And let's kind of talk about how that manifested in photography as well.
Right.
Or took you away from it, maybe. I don't know. there's a big debate on what is pure photography nowadays, right?
No, and I think I was definitely one of those people who would go to like many lengths to defend what photography meant, or what pure photography what was, and what was it supposed to do, and what role it was supposed to have in people's lives. Because I think, like so many photographers in India, I grew up with this idea that there were masters who had started photography in India, who continued their legacy, and we had to just be offshoots of their
Oh,
legacy and carry their voice ahead. And so I started as like a news photographer, a journalist, photojournalist, working free internships for like exposure and stuff, and working with one of these masters and like people. But then I started realizing that I did not enjoy so much photographing, because it was like an offset of people's voices. But I enjoyed writing about photography more,
okay,
and very much clearly remember having a conversation with one of the senior photographers, who I think I met at a gallery opening or something. And
right.
over a couple of drinks, he was just like, oh, these new photographers, they want to do everything. They want to photograph, they want to paint, they just want to write, but they don't want to be a master of anything. And that hit me, because in a way I wanted to be a jack of all trades and master of none. But it offended me,
Right.
it offended me to be like, oh, how dare you say that young photographers cannot be the masters.
Right.
um but then, it took me a while to like break away from the fact that I did not have to prove masters. Like, even the fact that you would call somebody a master is so colonial. It's
Hierarchy. Yeah, yeah.
a hierarchy. And so it like took me a while to like break away from the fact. But in New York, I did not have the weird coming of age story where like, oh, New York changed New York didn't change anything. I just had to
That's
suddenly
very
pay a lot of
interesting.
rent and live with a lot of anxiety.
Right.
But I think artistically, the program that I was in gave me enough space to like not put me in boxes and be like, this is what a photographer
Right.
means, this is what photography is. My program chair, Neil and Blake, they are not a photographer. I mean, they use photography in their practice probably, but they
Right.
don't identify themselves as a photographer. And it was very important to work with somebody, have conversations with somebody who does not come from that
Hmm.
understanding of what visual art is. It was very liberating. But mostly, I think the big change happened in my work when I lost all of my work, because my work was stolen while I was moving to a new
Stolen.
apartment. Yeah, it was. So I was moving to a new apartment,
Mhm.
and I had kept my bag, all of my equipment, my laptop, camera, hard drives, my
Right.
backups, everything in one bag, in the trunk of a friend's car, which got broken into that same night.
Oh,
And I
that
lost,
is
I lost everything. Like at this point,
fun.
if you would, like at this
Be
point, if you
very
would,
crushing.
um, it was 6 months before I had to graduate. It was crushing, definitely, but I think my mind has still not processed it. Like I still wake up and I'm like, oh, today I'm gonna have a breakdown.
Right.
Today it's gonna trigger me. Something is gonna trigger me, but it's not happened yet. So I guess I really got into a mode of like, oh, I have to make something out of this, because I have 6 months to graduate and I cannot show up at a solo show, which we were supposed to happen before COVID
Right.
started. Um, so I just like stopped relying on photographs and using printmaking and other stuff that I like completely broke away from what photography meant, just to save my ass in the program.
Okay. I have to say you're definitely a lot more collected about it. I'd been doing this project in I mean I firstly I hate using the word project because I just feel like it has that term has now so much baggage about what a project of photography needs to be. But for the sake of convenience, I'm just going to say project. And I was working on this project in Chennai for almost about 2.5 years. And one day I decided to sit and do the Maha edit, as we say, right? Like, let's just start from scratch again. And I
Yeah.
plugged in my hard drive and it would not work. And I had such a conflicting relationship with photography at that point, because I was like, why am I giving every thought and every idea of mine into this medium
Mm.
that can't hold it? You know, it doesn't have the capacity to kind of hold it. And
Yeah.
it was a very interesting, I think, argument that I was trying to have with photography as well, to say, like, you know, I mean, in so many ways, the idea of attachment is so embedded within photography. Like, it's just,
Right.
it's kind of like, you know, our trunk of things that we hoard. Like, and it keeps bringing me back to, like, my grandmother, who used to have like her like pitara of stuff, and like which
Yeah.
would just be stuffed with random things sometimes, but you always knew that it's there, and you know, you might access it at any point of time. Very similar to photography maybe in some ways.
Mm.
And so I went through a different reaction after losing my files, but I'm very impressed, I must say, to see how calm and collected you've been with that.
This is gonna make me tear up now.
Right. But I mean, also in many ways, and why I'm kind of bringing in the family element is because for you, the expansion of that medium did mean a kind of more intense engagement with the context of what you wanted to talk about, right? I
Mm.
mean, we were talking about the mastery of a medium, and it kind of brought me to this. One time I was having a conversation with someone and I said, "But what do you mean by master? I mean, do you want me to master a medium, or do you
Mm.
want me to master my voice and my thoughts?" You know, because at the end of the day, that's what's going to sustain us. And I mean, you know, whether we approach it through pure photography or mixed media or completely like a different medium altogether tomorrow. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm just working with sound waves tomorrow, you know. But what will hold it all together is who's saying it, which has become more and more important, it seems, you know, as you experiment within any medium. So I
Mhm.
mean, I really would like to know your thoughts around this mastery of the voice, and arriving at what actually it is that motivates you to create something, or the desire to communicate something at a given point of time. You know.
Yeah. I think I think about, I mean, if there are like, if I had to put down like three constant thoughts that keep me up, or I constantly think about in my practice, one of them has to be the question of the voice, what it means to have a voice. And I've had so many discussions with a particular friend um, of mine, who we go on lengths to talk about what does having a voice as an artist means, and how is it different from style, you know.
Hmm.
And it basically just boils down, maybe in like very layman terms, is what you have to say and what do you have to offer. And I think I put too
Right.
much pressure, more than I would like, sometimes, on this responsibility that I have, or that I have assumed that I have, in putting out something that will, I don't know, which represents uh what, how I think, what I want to be remembered, like, you know, what I want to be remembered as is again such a um
Hmm.
man thing to do. Like, I want to have a
The
legacy.
legacy of what you
Yeah.
leave behind, you
Yeah.
know.
But at the same time, I derive a lot of pleasure from putting out something in the world, like putting out a voice in the world that I know is going to be very short lived, is not going to, like through an Instagram story, you know,
Right.
or through an Instagram post. If I could just delete my account tomorrow, then nothing of that
Right.
would exist. So I definitely derive a lot of pleasure from this duality that an artist's presence or the artist's voice has now, which could be
Mhm.
as like, which could live as long as you want, but it could also be as short lived. And I think there is freedom in both of those things depending on what empowers you. um, but I think I completely agree with what you said. Like, it totally depends on the voice is definitely, and in photography or in visual arts now, it has become about what you have to bring and what do you have to say, and why. It's not just what you have to say, it's about why should you be the one saying it,
Saying it.
you
Yeah.
know and like what makes it's not about questioning somebody being like, oh, you shouldn't be the one saying this, but it's more about presuming this responsibility that if I were to be doing it, I should be held accountable, or I should be responsible um, to not justify, but hold my position if somebody
Right.
were to raise a question, basically.
Right. Right. I mean, which is becoming as I mean, as we have seen in a fairly recent past, but I mean also longer than that, it's become a very big concern because I think the little loopholes of photography are slowly opening out and revealing themselves as well. Something that we probably needed a long time coming, and it's kind of opened out new questions on what it means to represent, and what the assumed responsibility, like you said. Um, for a very long time, I felt that maybe photography or formats of pure photography um, had ensured a certain kind of protection to the medium because that accountability was always in check, at some place. I'm sure there were other spaces within the medium where this was not happening, but we'd like to believe that, that there was more of the accountability than not.
Right.
And slowly these have started kind of unraveling over the last few years and have raised even bigger questions on who gets to say what in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm not sure I'm someone who's an apt who absolutely believes that only one particular kind of person can talk about a particular kind of issue. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I think anyone who has invested themselves and who's kind of taken on that responsibility with honesty, like, it begins to even impact the nature of the work that's created there, and I mean, these will reveal themselves in due course as the project comes out, because when they are conflicts and friction, between the narrative of what the photographer proposes and what the work tends to do,
Mm-hmm.
those gaps become even more and more jarring.
Yeah.
um, I know that for you, that idea of representation has become even wider in some ways, looking at what we were talking about, like the larger diaspora in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly you felt that you had to also represent the voice of the diaspora, and you had to kind of then come down and say, no, this is me, and this is me speaking from what I know. Do you want to talk about that a little
Um,
bit?
I remember being on the call with you yesterday night, and now I'm up and I'm just like, how do I have complicated thoughts in the morning? Um, no, but
How do I
but
bring
yeah,
that
that.
about?
But the thing about uh, representational politics or identity politics, especially in a diaspora, or when it comes to like visual mediums, representing something in visual mediums, is so tricky
Right,
because when I moved here, and like I was saying yesterday, when I moved here, I felt this um, push or this encouragement towards talking about like from people from the culture that was in, because as a young artist you want to be relevant, you want to be
yeah,
seen, you want to be heard as immediately as possible. And
right,
like the older people want to say that you millennials just want instant gratification. I mean, there is nothing wrong with that. I wish you guys wanted it too, but but that's the thing, right? That because I wanted to be relevant, I felt like a pressure to talk about my identity almost in binaries, almost in ways that could
Mhm.
be consumed, that could be digested, could just become in like categorized small packages that I could like put around to people and they could digest, oh, like this is what an Indian identity looks like. And there have been cases, especially um, in like other MFA programs. I'm not going to name them, but there are MFA programs where if you are a student coming from India, you are always reduced down to a tokenized identity, like you are the diversity token. And it became like a running joke in my class that, ha, I am a diversity token in class. I'm getting around, I'm doing things because I'm a diversity token. I'm giving interviews for the school magazine, for the school fundraising website because I am the diversity token. You know, you always want to be
Mhm.
the white savior for a lot of people. And I was the lab rat for the white savior in a lot of ways. Um, but I think that pressure really puts you down, that puts you into like complying into these boxes, which was not very healthy for my practice particularly.
Right.
In a way, that not to say that my work is not about identity,
Mhm.
it is to say that my work is about identity, but identity is so complex, it could mean so many
Right.
different things. And to assume um, that a particular group of people, like marginalized people, can only talk about how marginalized they are is not healthy, you know.
Right.
I want to talk about my relationship with my mother. I want to talk about the cultural shock that like experienced when I moved to America, but at the same time I want to like make art about all the bad Tinder dates I've been on.
Right.
And that is not authentic of me. That is not being a millennial, you know, in like a bad derogatory
Right.
way. It's
And
still
that doesn't fit into that token identity that's been created, especially
exactly.
like the woman who's come to,
Yeah.
America now from like, yeah,
Yeah. So I mean, I that for me that became important to constantly remind myself that what identity meant. And in a lot of ways, doing the labor myself, doing the homework, like a research myself, and like educating people around, like often in like lectures or classes where we would have discussions, um, things would be very things would be very like America centric, like the
right,
art that we would be seeing, the papers that would be reading. Like we probably never read any paper by a South Asian writer. We never saw, very rarely we saw art by Indian or like South Asian artists. And so I always thought in a classroom I was perceived as the other.
hmm,
You always bring up the fact like, oh, you know who this work reminds me of? There's an Indian photographer, or there's this Bangladeshi photographer who's worked on the same thing, or there's this Pakistani scholar who's also worked on the same thing. And they would all wait. Sometimes I thought they all waited for me to tell them, instead of them doing the work of understanding that photography is not just European or an American concept, which also ties down to the fact that photography, as as I was in the classroom, photography is equally alien to India. Like, you know, we
yeah,
were always the other. Photography was always used on us, not for us. Um,
right.
so that is what I thought. I don't know if you want me to go into it because I could just go
I
down.
mean, if you'd like to, it would be amazing. But maybe what we could do is also look at some of the work as we discuss the different questions that did arrive, in especially, I think, for the two projects that you did want to discuss today.
Mhm.
Do you want to just share your screen and active
Yes, I will.
that file? I mean,
I have it. Okay.
okay.
I am so glad I'm not one of those students who has to take Zoom classes. No shade to anybody who's doing this. I just couldn't do it.
It's
Let
terrible
me,
because I am teaching online and I don't know how students are able to get anything I'm saying. Like I'm like, guys, are you following up with this? Because I don't know if it makes sense.
Okay, so I'm gonna do display full screen mode.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Okay.
that sounds good. And we can
Um,
just let it be on a loop, and you can speak along as you'd like.
okay. So, hi. This is this is the work that I mostly made during my graduate program. Most of it has been made after I lost all my work. So probably in from October 2019 until now, and I'm still working on it. This project explores. I'm always like shuffling between names, but my thesis solo show was named Ghore Bairer Alo in Bengali, which means the light outside home, which explores my relationship with my mother, and the fact that I moved to New York and the relationship, how it evolved over the 2 years. And it was this incident, this project was particularly born out of an incident that took place when I last saw my mother. Um, Back in India. I had gone home in January 2019 for my sister's wedding, and the last day at home was the day when my mother got really worked up. She seemed very upset from all the wedding stress, probably from all the tension, and also from the fact that I was leaving in 5 hours. And one thing led to the other, and my mother in front of me, she self harmed, as in, she ended up hitting herself in the head with a brass candle stand, which was um, like just lying on the TV console. And in just a matter of seconds, there was my mother, her bleeding head, and me holding a hand towel against her head to stop the bleeding. And a lot of crying, a lot of tension. And then just 5 hours later, I was um, on the plane to New York. And I probably did not speak to her for a really long time, but uh, it took me a while to contextualize the fact that while this was not the first time this was happening, that my mother felt overwhelmed, or I had seen something like this happen in my family, I realized that there was this pattern that I was ignoring, or something that I was not understanding about my mother and her inability to um, hold herself in certain situations, I guess. Um, and so because I started losing, when I lost my work, I think I immediately moved to the family album as a, like a place where I was like, all right, now I do not have photographs, but like, like you talked about your grandmother's box of things. It was like my box of things, because when I moved here from India, I had my box of albums that I got with me. So I think the family album photographs, the found images, were my way of exploring, like, fine, I've lost everything, so now I'm going to move ahead. And while sifting through the photographs, I find a resemblance, like I have found a resemblance between my mother, how she looked, and how I look now. And everybody, it's like a family thing, you look like your mother was like this, you absolutely look like your mother and everything. And so that made me question, um, what is it that I inherit from the women in my family, or from my mother, practically. Because when you look like her, then do you become her? And the thought did not come because looking like something necessarily become means that you become something, but photography as a practice is so obsessed, is so preoccupied with the act of looking, and the photograph becomes this byproduct of looking, that you just are convinced that physical resemblance is synonymous to fate. If I look like her, then I become her. Which, if I were to tell a lot of people that you are going to exactly end up like your mother, I don't know how many people would take that as a compliment or as something to look forward to. there is a
Something
garbage
that
truck.
we really do grow up with, right? Like that
Yeah.
anxiety of like, am I going to grow up and become my mother, or am I going to grow up and become my father? You know, it's
Mhm.
in many ways, I think it's an anxiety that is embedded in our existence because
Right.
we create our own ideas of who we
And I
are.
think
And
the question of inheritance, the question of what you receive from the women in your family is becomes more important because it's more than just, oh, my mother passed down jewelry or my mother passed down all these beautiful saris to me. It is about all these things that are not represented in uh, family history, which only exist as stories. And family albums as relics, they preserve that myth making because nobody puts in a family album what happened the night when Cheryl had to take the flight to New York.
right.
Nobody puts in a family album that my mother, um, has spent years struggling um, with something and nobody talks about it. So I think this project, this was like these were two stories, that what triggered the thought and what I'm trying to explore. Like basically the question, what do I inherit from the women in my family?
Hmm.
So this um, it started as a very basic like urge to juxtapose or mirror my mother in a way, in like very direct ways visually. So this is an inkjet acetate, like printed on clear acetate and overlaid on top of my mother's portrait, where she looked obviously like me. And then I started working with mylar because reflective mylar has this quality that you stand in front of it, it's wobbly, your reflection, but it reflects back. And
Hmm.
so I just started right from the top of my head, working and experimenting with these materials, which validated in a way or gave into the whole notion of my own assumption that I am becoming like my mother. And I started working with, these are photographs of her in the family album that I found. This is a photograph where um, my great grandmother, who's on the extreme
Hmm.
right, and then my grandmother, who's on the left, and then my mother in the middle, who's holding me in the mid, like on her lap. And this photograph particularly was very, very important to me because one, this was the only photograph with four generations of women in it. And secondly, the only thing I think I could, like a common thread, if I had to string through of all the women in my family, was that they all at some point accepted that they will live a lonely life, or they did not have, um, the joys of a married woman or something like that. They just accepted that there was some sort of sadness or some sort of complexity that came with being a woman or being a married woman in a conservative Indian middle class family. Uh, my great grandmother, an absolute brilliant woman, but I don't think like she lived alone. And my grandmother, who passed away when I was really young, from cancer, my mother, and like though they did have physical illnesses and ailments, nobody talked about how they felt or what they were going through, all these undiagnosed things that now seem like a big deal, but back then that is just what women were supposed to endure, I guess.
Right.
um, and then I started working with screen print. I think the reason I use materials in my photographs, I use photographs as a starting point from my work, is because I do not want to. I feel like I don't want to give images too much credit. Like, yeah, you're a photograph, but what else can you do? You know? Um,
Right.
so I started working with, like, I used reflective mylar. I used, like, then I started using screen printing. And it all came from this idea that I wanted to use materials which mimicked doing labor, that mimicked doing the work, that mimicked some sort of effort on my part that I was putting in to gap, like, bridge the gap, bridge this distance that my mother and I had in understanding physically, emotionally, everything. This is a screen print from like from the series The Last Time, where I took images of my mother from the family album and screen printed them onto a piece of paper over and over, sometimes with different colors, and used text to talk about what I remember of the last day when I saw my mother when she was back home. Some are more direct, some talk about the whole experience in totality with absolute clarity. But this one, for example, has repetition, has problem, like, has grammatical errors where I go back and cross out what I wrote. There are sentences which are just one word, sentences which are left halfway. But in doing that, um, I was trying to understand what relationship does text have with photographs. What responsibility does text then, assume in the work? And it's just the thing that, when, especially with memory, is the thing with memory is that, I don't know if you like know this, but as a kid I was already always told that if you want to remember something, you write it. So I just, like,
Yeah.
you just had multiple pages of this revision notebook where you would write this one paragraph again and again, and that is another
Mm.
whole ball game with the
That's
Indian education system, where you have to
true.
learn something by repeating it. And so repeating becomes this practice, or like repeating omission and editing becomes this practice of remembering something for understanding something better. But when you started something, writing something down, the first draft looks very different from the last. And so, in a series of these texts, where I use editing and omission, I start like cutting things out. I just use the text, I use certain blurbs of text,
Mhm.
um, like just as a practice of what I remember from that day, basically, um, of of my mother. And as the days progress, I go, like, it has been 425 days since I held a white hand towel against my mother's bloody forehead. It has been 13. So it's a way of repeating to yourself. It is also comes from the idea that I repeat it, I make edits, because writing as a practice, or like writing in a language that is not my own, is, like, I always feel like I would spend the rest of my life probably perfecting English. you know Even
Yeah.
when I'm in New York, people are like, oh, your English is so good. I'm like, yes, it's called colonialism. But I feel like I would spend a large chunk of my life perfecting this language. And the thing about writing is that you're always expected to put out a perfect draft. Like, this is it. You cannot revise it. Your word is the last word. And so, but why I just keep asking, why should artists be put under this pressure that your word is the last word? I want to be able to, like, go to a gallery when my work is put up and people are watching, and I'm like, you know what? I don't like the yellow. So I'm just going to change something up in it right now. And same thing I did with the text, where I kept going back to it and editing and omitting things on the text, as in how, not as in how I liked it, but as in how I wanted to remember it in the
Right.
future. And
I
I put, no, go
no,
ahead
no,
if you have.
continue.
But it was also to do with the fact that, why do I want to remember it in a certain way? Because one, I have a terrible habit of boiling thing down to self-deprecating humor. If something is definitely traumatic, you push it down, you fictionalize it in your head. You put it down in humor, you talk about it as if it does not matter. And which is what I did when I first introduced this story, for to say, in my class. People were really taken aback by um, the details of it, like how detailed I how in what details I would go ahead to talk about what my mother did, in a way that, like, why would you talk about it was a brass candle stand? Like, why do you have to mention that it was a brass candle stand, that particular detail? I was like, because a candle stand that are brass, in Indian households mean that, it has been there. You suddenly, then there's Diwali, and the same brass candle stand would be used to put in
Mm.
front of a goddess or something. It's brass because it's not iron, because iron candle stands barely exist. And secondly, you could have, I don't know, like these are things that
Yeah,
go on my mind, but like details are important to remember, because I think one of my favorite comedians, Hannah Gatsby,
right.
she said in one of her performances that you remember the story you put out in the world, or people remember the story you put out in the world. And so I made a conscious effort in putting out a story which was true to itself, instead of fictionalizing it or simmering it down for people to remember. Because that is what happens when, like when we're talking about stories about women, we simmer it down for say the viewer, which is an assumed man always, to be like, oh, fine, this is too much for me, but I will listen to it if you give me a simple idea. So
You
this was the
clean it
type.
up for me and sanitize it for me a little bit.
Exactly. And I'm like, I don't owe sanitation to anybody. Like now I do. But
Right. One little aspect of life where you do owe it, but the
yes.
rest is all the same. I mean, one of the things that actually did really um, that I actually started noticing a lot when I saw, your typewritten text also mixed in with your screen printing was, of course, the act of repetition. But in some ways, how that act of repetition for me was looking at this particular passage of time, where you are kind of going back to a particular memory, but the indentation that you use in your text, the elements that do get scratched out, the elements that you end up writing and then realizing this is not what I wanted to say, almost become very reflective of a mental state of being. They refer to, of course, so much more in the details that you have given out. The little textures of what the home is like, and in that dynamic, I mean, I can't remember which exact image it was, but you're also describing how there's this old television set, and the fabric of that old television set, and this candle stand on top, and I can pretty much almost place myself into a fictional version of your home, in some ways. And there are texts where there is a dispassionate recounting of an event, and then there are texts where there's almost this desire to be dispassionate, that it turns into either something that's humor oriented, or it turns into what begins to reflect as a state of confusion almost, because it's like you're writing down these details which are very specific, and then there is in some ways maybe a self censorship to not remember them in a particular format of brutality, but to
Mhm.
kind of also place yourself in it very differently, and these then become evident over places, text that's scratched or text that got transformed, or I mean, very, very literally speaking, also the passage of time, because as you said, the number of days keep changing, and it does bring into, that definitely kind of puts forward the idea of how we deal with trauma, you
Right.
know and what then becomes trauma, because the witnessing of something is trauma, but then I think after a while, after I read these texts over and over a couple of times, for me the trauma immediately went also to your mother, who's
Mhm.
kind of invisible in some ways, but and what was interesting was that you realize that you feel this way because you feel that your mother never really had a voice, in
Mhm.
had the chance to voice out her what she was dealing with, let's just say. And yet at the same time, I'm not listening to her, but I'm becoming sensitive to the idea that I'm not listening to her, that I'm becoming like a passive observer in that dynamic, which is, happens very often in larger family setups. I maybe at one point I would have said just in India, but I think it's pretty much a global phenomena. I don't think women get heard enough
Mm.
anywhere really, but and that kind of really got to me in terms of how when we work with images, we try, and at least for me, like one of the guiding factors for creating edits is a rhythm, is a pace, is a speed that you're trying to build up, because you're trying to um, evoke a certain idea through formats of repetition, or through formats of kind of chaos even. And over here it's interesting because the images almost become the backdrop of that, like your mother is kind of in the backdrop of that, and this text is becoming more and more chaotic, and your screen prints are also becoming more and more chaotic, because you start seeing different colors layer one over the other, or you start kind of and it really impacts how I begin to read that text as well, because if it's this monotonish kind of image that I'm looking at, I begin to imagine there's that day for you, in specific context to your own mental health, maybe was a day that felt a particular way, whereas other days, I mean, I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it starts seeping into the reading of that.
Yeah.
Um, and then along with this, of course, there's other elements that have come in. There's the use of an interdisciplinary media. You're using mylar in a particular way, you're kind of contorting within memories in a particular way. um,
Mm.
and then it comes together obviously in terms of looking at the other, which you do very specifically and very dedicatedly, that kind of reverses how that idea of looking can be, and what the what the triggers for that could even be.
Right.
Maybe we'll, as we go further
Yeah.
into that slide, it would be
I,
really
I
good.
love how you said that I dedicatedly keep looking at the other because even when I'm not photographing somebody, like that was, I think, one of the things where I think the works that I had referenced before making this work, who by other photographers, by other women who had photographed or like talked about their relationship with my mother, was always accompanied by a photograph that they had taken of them. But this work doesn't have a single photograph that I have taken of my mother. They were
Hmm.
all images of her that I have found. So I see her, I think, using words with seeing different mediums or directly through surveillance, which I will talk about much later. I mean, after this.
Right.
Then I started working with sculpture, like not crazy sculpture, but sculpture is a sculpture.
Yeah.
But um, I so the hand towel that I talked about earlier, which I held against my mother's head while she was bleeding, very instinctually, and really not out of like a weird artistic pleasure that I will make something out of it. I packed up these hand towels that I had and I put it in a bag and I brought it with me to New York. And they sat in the closet for like months and months and months, probably an entire year before I was even able to like take them out and do something of it. And that is how I realized that blood, when it dries and like blood stains, when it dries and had sat over a year, they become brown. And they lose their smell, which is why I was like really scared of taking them out. Just like, what if it smells? What if it is
Right.
bad? But I brought these towels with me without any intention of doing anything with them. I just instinctually like pulled it together, and when I made work about it, I embroidered on the hand towel. And then I solidified it in resin. Um, Embroidery, not because I'm really good at it, clearly, as you can see, but I embroidered the motifs um that I saw in my mother's shawls. That she gave me a bunch of shawls. Um, she gave me a bunch of saris to take, like, oh, it's gonna be summer in New York. Why don't you wear saris? And like, she gave me a bunch of her saris. So I embroidered the same motifs onto this shawl to mimic the idea that this is as much my inheritance as it is, as the shawls are in some way.
Right.
Um, and this was just a installation view, but I started doing that also with on larger pieces of fabric, where this was a large 30 by 40 piece fabric where I printed the image of my mother. This was a photograph of her from the family album, which was meant to be a matrimonial photograph, which in its concept is obviously a photograph that is sent to prospective grooms. And I think this was the photograph that was sent to my father.
Okay.
um, and so I, on the left hand side of it, I did um,
Yeah.
embroider the motifs, and on the right side I started again using text.
This is
And the text,
embroidered as well, right?
sorry.
Text is embroidered as well, right?
Yes, the text is hand embroidered as well. And it is just conversations that I had over with her, as in to push the work into a new direction, which said, "The last time I held my mother, she bled because no one loved her. Promise me you will not become like me," she said. "Practice until you can fix something." So, this whole idea that embroidery or like sewing was a practice of not just um, female intense labor, that oh, women are supposed to embroider or something, but it was also an act of fixing something, an act of mending like a tear or like a broken button or something like that. So
Mhm.
that is how I started using embroidery in my work. Again, my purpose was never to, I think, become a good seamstress or become somebody who embroiders for a hobby. Like, I don't know anything about embroidery, but that is again, like, I think breaks away from the idea that women aren't supposed to know
Yeah.
how to sew, or women are supposed to know how to embroider. um, these are just details. I think I'm pretty proud of this one. I'm pretty proud how good a job I did. My tailor back
Yeah.
in India was just like, this
Yeah.
is this is good
Your
embroidery.
school, did you have classes for embroidery when you were in school?
No, 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 not at all. Like, I think I talk about it in my thesis, like when I write about my practice, that my mother never sewed or she never embroidered. I saw my father sewing, and seen my father, stitch, like he's a hand surgeon, so seen him
Oh,
stitch back, like, medical stitches, or like
right.
he was the one who would stitch like back a button on the seam, or like something like that. So it was always my father in that way, but I did not practice. This is just me flawlessly winging it.
This is the father's side of your genetics showing up
Exactly.
and showing it themselves off. Well, I mean, it's quite interesting that you start engaging with these ideas that are in some way obviously connected to larger stereotypes of the gender that you are, I can't say represent, but maybe the gender that you have chosen to belong to. And at the same time they become stages for you to maybe even explore fragments of identity that's often shoved down within the geographical being,
Yeah.
within your geographical being, like and somehow in creating a reaction to those stereotypes, it's also led to exploring those stereotypes and those
I mean,
the
this was a work that I was making in like probably winter last year, and I absolutely was on my couch, huddled up. I was feeling like that old woman, just like all my day looks like is me embroidering and sewing
yeah.
and knitting. That's all I was doing. So I think it was good to like have that, but yeah, it's just really hard. Like, I think people who do it, I have so much respect for them, but
Right.
it was to practically break away from the idea that um like, oh, what are you going to sew on your um like, your shawl or something, or if you, is it a flower, is it a small animal? I'm going to sew what my mother taught me or my mother told
Hmm.
me over the phone. So it was just putting into that idea. Later on, I started exploring the idea of, when I started like directly exploring the idea of becoming my mother, I started deliberately inserting myself in the same photographs of my mother. And in a way that I could not photograph my mother because she was not here, but I had these
Right.
large prints of my mother that I made, and I placed them around and in the like in my domestic space in my apartment, and I photographed myself along with her.
Mm-hmm.
To like I used a lot of mirrors, um and this is again like in the back you can see there's a print of my mother.
Yeah.
And I was just making these images of my mother. In a way, it was also like talking about what does the domestic photograph look like? What
Mm-hmm.
does it mean to photograph myself within a domestic space? Because my mother was photographed in the domestic space also, but that was for a matrimonial photograph.
Right.
This is definitely a thirst trap, but I'm not sure how many of them would like want it as a
Yeah.
matrimonial
I don't.
photograph.
Yeah. I don't think they might
I
go
mean,
in
I
much.
would definitely send this as a matrimonial photograph. This is for you to wife me up, but I don't know how like my mother-in-law will react to
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. I
Um,
I get that. I mean, it would be great if she does respond to it and says, "Let's go meet her." She sounds interesting.
exactly. So this is what I started doing. Like I think placing myself within images where there's a small detail of my mother where you could see her in the image and stuff like that.
I
But
mean, it
then move.
also reverses really well with the idea of if you already look like her, then you might become her. But in this process, it almost feels like because you already look like her, like you have bits of her within you, and
Mhm.
in some ways, it almost becomes like who she is now being kind of expanded into who you are becoming as well, like a reversal of what one
Exactly.
usually fears, because now you've got her traveling with you in
Yeah.
into your apartments in New York, walking into your classrooms,
Right.
going out for a smoke or a drink once in a while, like, and actually being part of that other world that she probably
Mm.
never engaged with, in her years as well.
Exactly. And I think this, like, as I'm progressing, like, with different mediums in my work, like, these are straight photographs. As
Right.
I progressed with different mediums in my work, every medium that I picked on was a conversation with the last. And
Mhm.
everything that I did. And then after these photographs were made, I started thinking about um, the idea of motherhood, the idea that is passed, like I think the idea of motherhood is also passed on to women, like, oh, this is what a mother should be like, and there's like so much propaganda around it, like, oh, motherhood is so sacred and so beautiful and so rewarding. I am not a mother myself, but um from what I have known and seen through other mothers around, I'm like, this is not as nice as everybody tells. Like, at
Yeah.
what point do like that is how it works. And so I started thinking about um motherhood in general, and I started thinking about the maternal instinct, or what we call it. I think it is Maggie Nelson who in her book The Argonauts talked about the gendered mother, which is such a interesting phrase. But it's not
Mhm.
interesting is a bad word, but it is such an important phrase to understand. There's something called a gendered mother, and somebody who embodies the maternal instinct, embodies the responsibilities of a mother in a way. There was a gendered mother, and then there were mothers who felt like mothers without becoming one ever, without wanting children of their own. And the redundant concept that motherhood is attached to the the physical evidence of a child, which is so
Right.
weird. I think I talk about this in my book, and I'm learning to be more like open and confident about talking about it. Is that in 2018, I had an abortion, and I that was my that is as far as I could go, and I would be willing to go to talk about motherhood or take responsibility of motherhood in a way that it made me feel um, bad for like taking that decision, but also good. And I remember it like in a conversation when I told my mother about it, much after it had already happened. She was very understanding. She was like, she consoled me and everything, but it all the whole conversation ended with, but you betrayed me, you know, like you went out of your way, like obviously you went out of your way,
Yeah.
but like you did this thing without my permission. You betrayed me, you betrayed your body, you have betrayed my trust in a way by going ahead and doing something like that. But it's
Right.
also like say that it was an assumed like you know, this understanding that I was supposed to not do something that I did, or this thing um that she expected out of me, as if like, you know, how much control do I have on my body?
Yeah.
Is my body is also something that I, like, you know, loaned from my mother or inherit from my mother, that I have to take care of her, for her, take
Hmm.
care of my body for her. And if I don't take care of my body, if I hurt myself, then it's a betrayal to her and not to myself. So
Hmm.
this onus, and this photograph that I skipped through was a recreation of my abortion, which is a very watered down version of it. Like it's a very simmered version. It was, I think, if
I
women
can't
who,
even I can't even begin to fathom
I
the
mean,
trauma of that.
it was, I mean, it was, um, and not to get in much into it because that is not the whole idea of the work, but to talk about
Right.
abortion, to talk about motherhood, to talk about um
The
the
body, in fact, like
responsibility,
God.
the body, and what, like, you know, like whenever I have put this work within a gallery, like within a space where people can view it, if people do not want to talk about it, which has been the most case because it is a disturbing image for most people, but a lot of people assume that this is just me menstruating. And I mean, this is me menstruating, but like, um but the whole idea that blood is so like, it's such a thing, you know, like, that, oh, if there's blood on a woman, it's obviously menstrual blood, or obviously like, and
Right.
in a way that, oh, why do you have to, like, you know, there would be critiques in art school where like, oh, why do you have to involve blood in your work? But like, it is so, you cannot detach the experience of being um a person, like, you know, a person who identifies as a woman, a person who lives their life experiencing womanhood in any form. You cannot detach that from the fact that there is going to be blood, in a way that menstruation, yes, abortion, yes, but also blood to signify trauma and tragedy in your life. The way my mother hurt herself, there was blood there. The way I had an abortion, there was blood there. So I think this was the first time I did something like that. And I was just like, oh my God, those stretch marks are hideous. But to also like
Our
break
time. Let's just get to that.
but
But
also
you
to
know what
break
you say is, sorry.
no, go ahead.
I mean, what you were talking about, it actually took me back to this research that I was doing and still continue to do on traditional midwifery. I think I was for the longest time extremely fascinated by this idea of being so aware of your body as a woman, and of course, as the more I read about traditional midwifery practices in India, you realize that caste is so intricately involved in that, because the midwives that you do have are invariably from the Dalit caste, or a community that's largely considered untouchable in many ways. Um, and so I started kind of reading up, and one interesting thing that came up is that in all academia related papers and texts that I did read, the act of menstruating is referred to as the act of polluting.
Mm,
Um, I mean, it was a very interesting use of that word, because you would even have like extremely active feminists, but if they're academics, they would refer to the menstrual cycle as the act of polluting.
mm-hmm.
And I could never wrap my head around that, because I mean, the idea that blood flows through your body but also blood flows out of your body was
Right.
so difficult to kind of make peace with,
Yeah.
or to accept, or to just live with it, that you had to kind of create a completely different meaning out of a word that did exist you know
Exactly.
um, and that is why it became easier. I'm obviously going off tangent here, but for these women who belong to a caste that would never allow them access to social engagement, becoming a midwife was the only way to be accepted by a larger society, because
Right.
you were willing to do the dirty work, you know.
Exactly.
And it's something that very often, even expecting mothers, even women who had been mothers already, would not want to associate themselves with the idea of blood.
Mm-hmm.
It became inferior to acknowledge that you bled,
Yeah.
and it was just very fascinating, because suddenly you begin to understand how deeply rooted this fear is towards
Mhm.
towards something that's so natural. And the more taboos you create around it, I mean, you're in the States, we don't need to discuss what abortion laws are like over there, and
Exactly. I mean,
what
it
the
gives me so
conversations
much,
like over
yeah, it
there.
gives me so much anxiety when I like open up news about like abortion laws, and I'm like, if there's one reason I'm getting back to India, it would be the health crisis in America. But to talk about like blood and abortion and control over one's bodies and the how we view our own bodies, it was to also look at um, the idea that motherhood is passed down like this. Like my mother, I have two more siblings, so like she became a mother to three people. She always wanted to be a mother, but what about me who has or like has maternal instincts but does not maternal instincts in a way that I am caring, in a way I'm in a way taking care of my mother through distance, and I want to look out for her, but I don't have a child as evidence to show for it.
Right.
What does like the idea of motherhood is passed down from generations to generations, and I don't see myself um yet becoming a mother, but this was my like this was my experience with motherhood. I think we talked about it, and this like image was constantly on the screen, and I am just wondering how many people it made uncomfortable. But moving on, I had again more mediums, and this poster that I started screen printing on was in posters of the subway, like the subway system in New York, where they would have announcement for trains and like, oh, this train is coming and this train is not going to be working in different languages. And I started stealing those posters because they were such great posters. I mean,
Great
if there's
order.
yeah, I mean, they were great posters. So like, so they would put up these posters, and I would steal these posters, and I started screen printing on them. One, it was a great way to practice screen printing to like on the back of the posters, but it also started. There could always be arguments made on like why I was doing it, but I practically did this out of an impulse to just make a mark. Like I just wanted to take something that belonged to the city in a way, or that represented New York, and I just wanted to screen print images of my mother all over it. And it became like a started as a very childlike impulse to steal, to
Right,
claim something, and to just mark it. You would go on a wall and you would just like scribble with your new crayons. That was my
right,
impulse. But in starting to do that, I started to understand that I was basically trying to bridge this gap that existed between my mother and me physically. And so that is something that I explored in this particular work called Planned Work. Um,
right.
um, and then this, I think this is, yeah, I think then I started working. I was also working with surveillance. I see that smile on my face, like now we're talking. um, so I started working with surveillance. I had, for the context, for those of you who do not know the work, um, we had a surveillance camera involved in the living room and other common spaces of our family home in Delhi. Um, and
Cheryl,
it was
you're freezing in very tiny bits. I think maybe there's something up with the network where I seem
um,
to have suddenly, yeah, you seem to have frozen now.
Can you hear me? Wait a second.
We'll just take a second for Cheryl to come. I think, yeah, she's back.
Yeah. Okay. Um. So yeah, I started. Not read mode. I started. Um. So we had a surveillance camera installed in our home in Delhi, and it was actually put in place to watch over our dog who passed away like 4 years ago or something. She was very sick, and so nobody, and then nobody bothered to like pull the cameras down. Nobody bothered to like do anything with the cameras. If they're there, they're there.
We
More security, I
silent
guess.
spectators of your life.
Yeah. And so when I moved here, I took control of the surveillance camera and I started watching my mother through the surveillance camera. This is her, and that's our new dog in the living room, and this is our living room. Um, I made a film about it called Promise Me. The YouTube link is here. I can also put it in the comment section later in the
That would be
chat.
great.
But it is a 7 minute long film about me watching my mother and these clips that I recorded on my phone, which were overlaid with conversations that I had with her, which are conversations or like her singing, me saying things, me speaking my writing or like verbalizing other things that we had. So it was um, I think so much of context is like so much of the context is understood when you watch the film. In a way, I
Right.
struggle to talk about this work, but I was using particularly surveillance as a medium to watch my mother, to watch over my mother, or to just look at her as she existed in her space.
Right.
Or sometimes there was just like this voyeuristic urge to be like, oh, I wonder what my family is doing
What's
today.
up? Yeah.
But it was also a way to be like, oh, I really miss my family today. I want to see what they're doing, because sometimes it would be New Year's or my brother's birthday party, and they would be having a birthday party in the living room. And I'm like, I wish I was there, but I think I will assume this weird vantage point for now and just look at my parents. And the way the camera is placed, I think, is interesting because it just
Mhm.
makes like you have like a god-like
Yeah, you
um
become
vantage
all-seeing,
from the, like, yeah,
omnipresent entity in
yeah,
some way.
you're looking at everything from the top. You're like, assuming this position of like somebody who sees it all at once or takes it all in at once. But surveillance also as a medium, which is tricky, and it is so vulgar in a way that it's like, it's because it has been used to control marginalized bodies. It has been used to stigmatize and track people for years and years now. I mean, now people are coming to realize like, oh, there's something called digital surveillance, and like your data is being collected. But I think it is
Absolutely.
I think it for me to use surveillance was a very natural progression from making photographs, because photographs inherently have the quality of looking at somebody in a way, and also assuming the position of somebody who has the power to look at somebody, like the
Right.
authority to look at somebody, like, and which also brings me to the point that the shock or the shock or the surprise that people experience when I tell them, oh, I've been watching my mother through a surveillance camera, is very funny to me, because photography as a practice emerged, especially in India, as a colonial tool. It as a tool
As a
by
tool of
like,
watching and observing,
yeah,
so much.
yeah. And one of the first applications, like commercial or like a public application of photography in India, was in these police headquarters, where photographs were made of inmates, photographs were made of all these criminals, and they were used for records basically. And so photography always had this exploitative quality about it. And so the surveillance is only a very pixelated, a very digitized, a very low quality version of a photograph that you would make on a large format camera. But I started looking at my mother, but I was also asking myself, why am I looking at my mother? and
Right.
who am I looking at and from what position.
Yeah.
Because it is always assumed when you're a surveillant, when you're watching somebody, you are inherently a bad person, you are inherently
Yeah.
here for something. um
And
and
there's a
you
fear definitely involved, right? Like, I mean,
yeah,
the act of
definitely.
surveilling is because there is a distrust in what you see,
Exactly.
to a certain degree. And I mean, actually, talk to me a little bit more about this surveillance idea in terms of like how, I mean, what is it that you felt surveillance did that maybe a video call with your parents would not be able to do? I mean, it could be FaceTiming them, it could be, you know, even with parties, in that sense, like I feel like they are those moments where you can choose to engage by saying, hey, just leave your laptop there and I'll kind of hang around and I'll have my drink on my end. And, but there's clearly something else that's been satisfied with this existent but non-existent entity that's
Yeah.
kind of watching over, and I mean it's quite a reversal in terms of how we use surveillance in many ways. We've seen very recently in our own political past how surveillance has been used against people movements,
Yeah.
and over here there is almost surveillance being used to create intimacy. And I mean, when I say create intimacy, it's for you to create that intimacy. Is your mother feeling the same way about being watched? Is that something that you've had a conversation with her about? What is it like for her to know that you're kind of always there?
Right. I think there are three parts to
Hmm.
this, and the thing you
Very
said. So I'm going to
large
address
question I put out. Yeah.
I'm going to address this one by one. I think the last thing actually that you said about her knowing that somebody is watching her. I think I made sure that I constantly have a conversation with my mother about this work, and I keep
Okay.
her involved and keep her in the loop. So she was always aware that I was watching her in one way or the other. But there was also this trust that probably that we have as like mother daughter, that you are my daughter, you are watching me, if it's not somebody else, which is why I think I understand why when tell people that I watch my mother on a surveillance camera, they are very surprised. They're like, oh, does your mother know, you know does your mother know you watch her? And I'm like, yeah, she knows. But if I were to say that my mother watches me, or watches over me, then you do not question that, because it
Question
is
is, yeah.
assumed that a mother is supposed to do that. It is a very motherly instinct to watch over their children, to watch over somebody, like, as if a minute of missed attention would be like, oh my
Yeah.
God, will cause a havoc
Me
or
in your role as the
something.
mother.
Exactly. So, I mean, I think what is vulgar in a way, or like what is not assumed in this work, is the reversal of who is watching and who is getting watched. I am the daughter, and there's a role reversal here, that I am assuming the position of a mother in a way by watching over my mother in like a total sense. The first question that you asked about how does this medium satisfy something that probably FaceTime wouldn't,
Right.
or like a video call in general wouldn't. To answer that, I think it was very like there are two things to it. One is, well, my mother is not very good at video calls, so whenever I would talk to her, she would face the camera to the fan, and I would always see the fan moving like just on the ceiling, and she would be talking into the phone. And it became difficult, and like, the quality was bad, it was pixelated, I would not be seeing the whole face or something. So this very like out of convenience, I wanted to see how she existed within the space, which was more convenient. And the second thing, which was more important to me, was um, to be able to see her without expectation of a conversation, without obligation of saying, hi, I am watching you, would you like to be watched, or would you like to have a conversation about something? Because it was the time difference. It was 4 in the morning for me, and it was early in the morning for her, and I wanted to watch her. It was early in the morning for me, and she had already gone to bed. Often she would sleep on that couch that is there in the
Mhm.
photograph. And there were things that I did not, the things that I do not want to say to my mother, the things that I do not have the capacity, do not have the strength to hold conversations for. Like, why did you sleep on the couch today? Or why are you sitting, like, why did you spend most of your morning lying, putting your head down on a table today? There are conversations,
Right.
because there's so much understanding that you take for granted when you spend time with somebody in
Right.
person. Why they act a certain way, who they are when nobody's
Mhm.
looking, or what they want to say but do not want to put into words. So when I used to see my mother at, like, in the middle of the night, when the surveillance would like turn into like an infrared, like black and white image at night, I saw her lying on the couch, and I would be like, okay, I know she's had an argument with my father. Or
Mhm.
um oh, I know my father doesn't, like, my father doesn't want the air conditioner on in the bedroom, so she just came and slept in the living room where
Right.
she could put on the air conditioner. So these were things that were very trivial. Like, who wants to talk about air conditioners, like, on a conversation that when you're having only once a day? And but like, who also wants to do the labor of having a conversation about a troubled relationship when you don't get to see your daughter every day? So it was
Right.
like, just watching her through the camera was me picking up these things, like, oh, there are fruits on the table, so the fruit person would have, like, the fruit vendor must have come in. Oh, there are flowers on the table. And sometimes it went to a point where I knew that my mother started, she has a habit of buying flowers every time. Like, there would be gladiolus, there would be rajnigandha, there would be a bunch of roses and everything. And I'm like, all right, the table is absolutely full of flowers right now, and she's having a great time. It's spring season, the vendor is coming in every day and stuff. But when it was winter, nothing like that would be on the table.
Mhm.
And then when COVID happened, surprisingly enough, um, there would be always a bottle of hand sanitizer on the table, always.
Right.
And you could see, like, people coming in from the outside and then putting their masks on the table. So this was a way of, like, understanding how the family functions. But also, this is the dining table that we all had a meal around. So sometimes I would see that there would be plates laid out, and because we were a family of five, there are only now three plates laid out, because my sister is married and my brother lives with my parents. So it was my brother, my father, and my mother. And so it was a
Right.
ritual that my mother continues to preserve. I think it was like a thing in my family that nobody liked, that she was adamant that everyone has to share a meal at the table at least once a day. And we talk, we share our days. And it was, as a teenager, it was horrendous for me. I'm just like, I don't even like my family that much. Like, I don't want to spend time with you.
I don't think
But
I
she
can do
was,
this every day.
but now I look at it and see the plates laid out, and I feel really, really sad because there's nobody I have here to share a meal with. I do not lay out my table. Only lay out my table as much as I have to wash after.
Right.
And so it was a way of, like, understanding what I took for granted for so long. But it was also to understand that the family life continues for my mother even if I'm not there. The tables are still being laid out, the flowers are still being bought, television is still being watched, games are still being played at the table. So I think that became a way to, like, reconnect with my mother, or to establish intimacy in the relationship that I assume that surveillance does not provide. Like, imagine, like, some person in, like, a hacker cell sitting being like, oh, that's cute what this man is doing, and this man doesn't even know he's being watched. So it's like,
Right.
but also the next part that you said about surveillance as a thing that has become a recent, like, suddenly people are realizing how much it.
Maybe not so recent. I mean, in many ways, surveillance, the idea of it has emerged from,
Yeah.
military tactics. It's you instill that sense of fear, and then you kind of propel it forward by this constant, viewing of
And how,
voyeuristic viewing.
there is fear, there is voyeurism in viewing, and it's when I say recent, I also mean that it's only recently that people are coming to understand the consequences of surveillance.
Right.
That you would not, like, the government choose to see what they want to see, and and they will go to any lengths and spend any amount of resources to track down that one person that they think is anti-nationalist in the movement of, in the context of larger things, but will steer their eyes away from something that is, like, clearly a human rights violation,
Right.
and they have to take responsibility of it, and they're like, oh, we don't have data on it. Like hundreds and hundreds of
Right.
migrant deaths that happened during the COVID
There was
uh,
absolutely no information
crisis.
available
And
on it.
yeah, and there's absolutely no information. This might as well not be remembered down the line. It exists in just people telling each other that, oh, this we had to go through. And then suddenly, months after, Umar Khalid is taken away, like he's arrested from his apartment, because there is enough evidence through surveillance that he is the one who orchestrated the CAA protest, as if he's one person who can actually orchestrate an entire movement that is this entire country believed in to some extent. So surveillance then becomes this, like, and I think because I was this work was being made and is still being made in the backdrop of knowing all those things, even though I'm not there physically, it becomes all the more responsibility for me to question, what am I doing with surveillance? What does surveillance mean to me? This in no way, is it, this in no way is to say that oh, surveillance is nice sometimes, like, I'm not trying to be that one person in the crowd being like, oh, it is what you look at, it is how you look at. Surveillance is inherently oppressive. There's no doubt about it. But I am using it personally in my work to subvert that assumption, to subvert the responsibility, and also to assume the new position of a caregiver to my mother, because this is how I care for her. Sometimes I look at her and I don't have to call her because I know the flowers are there. She's not on the couch for a long day. I've not seen her, so she's out. She's having a good time. She's probably gone out and doing something. So I don't have to call her every day. And she feels good about the same thing. I mean, I remember my mother saying this thing to me recently where she said, why don't you post more Instagram stories about your plants, about your cooking anymore? I'm like, it's a different thing, because I feel like I'm drifting away from being on the internet a lot. Like, I don't want to be perceived anymore as much
Right.
and so I have a very flimsy relationship with how much I want to be perceived. Sometimes I would put up so much information about my life that a random stranger would come up and be like, oh, I know you so clearly. And sometimes I would be
Right.
the mysterious person on Instagram. But my mother tells me that I really miss seeing photos of your food. I don't have to talk to you every day because I've seen that, oh, you've gone out of the park, you've put up photos from the park, you're hanging out with your friends, you're cooking food, you're eating food. I know you're okay. And that is in its own way of surveillance. She is
Right.
surveilling me. She is looking through my stories. She only follows me on Instagram in a way that she's like, oh, she would ask me like, oh, what meme did you post today? What was that about?
Right.
Like,
Right.
what is going on? Are you fine? Have you eaten? So we are both surveilling each other's context, but mine seems more vulnerable, like mine seems more vulgar and more voyeuristic, given the context that surveillance cannot be detached from its purpose as an oppressive tool, basically.
Right. Right. I think it's been an absolutely wonderful conversation. We've kind of hit a little over time, but I have no regrets on that. I'd, in fact, like to continue a little longer if we could.
Oh, sorry.
But
Should I
we
stop
have
sharing?
yeah, sure. Could you
Okay.
share the link for that YouTube
Yeah, yeah.
video for those who are on our chat today? They
Hmm.
are two questions as well from anonymous attendees. So
Mm-hmm.
I will just say they for now. But one question does say, even though this narrative is maybe as much as yours as much as it is hers, it's a very dangerous line as well, where you wouldn't want your narrative to overpower hers. her in this situation, is your mother, I'm
Mm-hmm.
assuming. How do you ensure that while discussing your experience through the thesis, you do not take over her story and maybe unfairly romanticize or pity or misrepresent her? How do you give your mother a voice through yours?
I think this is a very important question because, as much as I did not want to, as much as I did not want, like, did not want to be the person like, oh, look at me, I am so sad because I have a troubled relation or complicated relationship with my mother. I also realized that I did not want to represent my mother's voice directly in my work. So it became a thing. I do not talk about how my mother is in this work. I
Yeah.
never use the word, I do not label her, I do not say what she is. I only talk about my relationship with respect, like my relationship with my mother, with respect to the fact that this is an incident that happened or she goes through certain things. Because I stand by the fact that the only story or narrative that I can take responsibility of is mine, in a way that if my mother ever chooses to talk about her experience, she will do it herself. And it is not on me to, and it is not my responsibility just as a daughter to say, here is what my mother is, and here is what I should be, here is what you should know about her, and stuff like that. Um,
But the exploration of even that incident, or even looking at the prism of you and your mother, they are certain assumptions that are created for your
yeah.
mother, by default of there being your voice, and it being connected to another individual, though, right?
That is why I think that when I wrote the text, it went through multiple drafts, and I think that one of the first drafts that I had written was this very overwhelming, sappy, like just a recreation of what I felt in that moment, more than what I saw. And if you go through the text, I think I make a conscious effort to talk very little about how I felt. Um,
Yeah.
but I make a very conscious effort to talk about what I saw, which in a way text here functions as the act of photography.
Right.
It is still exploitative in a way because it is not my experience that I'm talking about. I am talking about something I saw. So I
Yeah.
think through the edits of the text, I had to make sure that I was not using adjectives as much as I wanted to. I went into the details of the material of things, what they meant, and how they were placed in the room. But I made a conscious effort of not, um, not projecting how it made me feel. I
Hmm.
mentioned the days it has passed. I mentioned what she did. I mentioned what I did. But I do not, in the text, I do not pity her. I do not romanticize it. I do not say, oh my God, the blood seeped into the towels like flowers blooming or something like that, because it was
Right.
not
Right.
that. I do not pity her in a way that I do not say that, oh, what a woman to be feeling like this on a perfect day when I'm leaving for New York. I
Hmm.
put facts the way they are because I do assume responsibility of what I'm putting out. And to say that, how, like the question that says, how do you give your mother a voice through your voice? I'm not giving my mother a voice at all. I am just giving myself a voice, or my voice a channel through this work. I never say that my mother feels this way or she
Hmm.
does this. In the surveillance work that I have, she says things, and that is why it becomes important for me to collaborate with her, to constantly have conversations with her. Because in no way am I being this person right now, or trying not to be this person where I'm like, oh, I'm an angsty teenager, or like an angsty woman who's just very upset that my mother is a certain way. i
Hmm.
I do not do that. I have conversations with her. Even the surveillance work, I ask her questions, she says certain things, she calls me and does certain things, and I think her voice is her voice, and I will not take on the responsibility of to represent her voice. If she wants her voice to be heard, then she will do it herself. I will give her, like, I it is not on me to give her space. Like, I'm not holding any
Right.
space. I'm only taking space to talk about my work, I think.
Right. Okay. Great. We have another question connected to surveillance. Um, so the comment says, you mentioned that your mother was okay with you being on the other side of the surveillance camera because of the relationship that the two of you share. But otherwise, do you think there's a difference between how the two generations understand and perceive the idea of privacy, surveillance, and voyeurism?
Hmm. I think this is a very important question because I think there is um, a difference in understanding and just generations of how they see a presence of an electronic device in a space, and what they think or what they know the consequences of it to be, more than it's different from what I know for of its consequences to be. But I think this is also where I think this work has been born out of a lot of collaboration with a lot of conversations. My mother knows why I watch her. I have talked at lengths, had hours long conversation on why I'm watching her, what it means for her to watch me on Instagram, for me to watch her through the surveillance camera, and what consequences it has, what it makes me feel. So I think if we do not, even as I mean, I think this becomes in, I mentioned collaboration in both the answers because
Yeah.
um it is always assumed that because I am the artist, because I am producing the work, I have this power over the person who is being represented. But I do not. I do not want to have the power, because what will I achieve ultimately out of this power? Nothing, practically nothing. Because fine, I feel good about myself at the end of the day. I feel good that people are hearing what I had to go through at the end of the day, but I do not desire that power. I do not desire that stage, because what matters to me is that I talk about uh, the relationship with my mother, as much as I'm talking about it outside of my relationship with my mother. So when I say when you like the question the when the question asks uh, how does she perceive surveillance and everything, I think it was my responsibility to make sure she understand what it means in the
Right.
context that I was making the work, in the context that I was putting it together. And I mean, there's always going to be a difference. There's going to be things that she understands, that things that I do not understand. Even not even if I was surveilling, but even as an artist, like that, she doesn't understand most of the art that I make, most of the references I make in my work. But like the willingness for her to have a conversation about it is something which I think bridges the difference, which bridges the gap.
Mhm.
Um, but otherwise, I do not think anybody would ever be okay. Like deep down, even she is not okay with being perceived in those ways.
Right.
Um, but there's like this exhaustion which comes with age, or this exhaustion which comes with, fine, my daughter is an artist and this is what she has decided she wants to make art about, and I will let her have it, you know. If the power dynamics was, if I was watching somebody else, I would not um say the same thing. Then
Yeah.
you are watching somebody else. Like if I was watching another woman who was not my mother, and then trying to say that, oh, I have talked to her. But no, I think um it remains voyeuristic. It is only this work is given context, or doesn't remain as voyeuristic as as somebody would assume, is because of the relationship I share with her. And there's this mutual understanding and trust we have built through the years, which makes this work less voyeuristic, I guess. I hate the word voyeuristic. I
Less
such
voyeuristic is a tricky space to be in.
It
Um,
is, yeah.
you know, I'm curious to understand. I mean, there is. I mean, although you do not desire that place of power, but there is an apparent hierarchy that ends up coming into place by the pure act of you being the one who's watching, and then that being something that is then shown, well, to the world at large, but also then that act of creating is also for it to be placed outside of your conversation with her
Mhm.
as well, you know.
Right.
And I mean, I'm curious to know, for that pure act, and maybe we're going a little off tangent before we wrap up this talk today, but has your mother ever had the desire to then project or present herself in a particular manner to the surveillance camera? I'm very curious to know about that, because even though she knows it's you watching, she also knows the larger conversation that it's coming under, and she knows that this is work that's going outside of just your laptop screen.
Yeah.
Has
Uh,
that triggered her response to this camera in any particular way?
so the thing is that my mother, even though she knows that I watch her, she has no control of when I watch her. So I choose to, I'm not gonna call her up and be like, oh, I'm gonna watch you. Why don't you like sit?
Right.
You know, sometimes
Right.
um there are sometimes days when I open and log onto the app and there's nothing. There's just an empty room. There's no one in the backyard. There is no one in the hallway. Nothing at all. Like, and then there are just like miss shots. Suddenly, then sometimes like specifically in the evenings when I log on and I know my mother is gonna be flipping through newspaper in the morning because she does that every time.
Mhm.
In the evening, I know she's going to be watching television. In the afternoon, sometime when I'm up maybe at odd hours, she will be eating food at the table. In the like she spends time there, so I think by being around her, I know what she like is about to do or when she's about to be in a space. But otherwise she does not. Like, none of the footage that I have taken of her is performative in any way.
Okay.
I
Okay.
Yeah. And if she'd like if I probably like, yeah, I don't know, because that's the thing, because surveillance is such a pixelated bad quality thing that okay, fine, you're gonna sit by the window, you're gonna do, and it's still, if I zoom in, your face is still not visible.
Right.
Might as well be not. Like, if you zoom in and you try to say, oh, is this Cheryl's mother, like maybe you don't know, like maybe some like other mm, like placeholder is in this position. Because that is why I'm not obsessed with the idea of constructing an image or like constructing or posing a thing, because I cannot change how the living room looks. The camera is there, so there's no. And my mother, her face is pixelated, so there's no point in asking her to do certain things. She
Right.
sleeps, eats, she sits at the table and reads a newspaper, and that is what keeps going. So no, I haven't. She hasn't performed for the camera. I think that would be interesting. I think I invented the Zoom photo shoots before it was a thing, but make it so.
Right. You were like, come on, family, get in front of your laptop screens and let's do this.
You know.
We do have one more question from Anubhuti Gupta. Uh,
Hmm.
how would you feel if your mother watched you through a surveillance camera? You mentioned earlier that your mother kind of looks over you through your Instagram stories, but definitely it's different from looking through a surveillance camera, because you choose to show or leave out certain things on Instagram, and it's not so in the other situation.
Right. I think while while I have constant access to the surveillance footage, I don't watch her all the time. I don't think I have watched her in like 2 months now.
Oh,
But like, like that's the same thing with Instagram. Like, you can log in whenever you want. I know it's a different thing when it comes to surveillance and Instagram, but I think you do not see surveillance like Instagram as surveillance because you think you have certain control over the data you're putting up, because you uploaded that selfie, because you uploaded that photograph of yourself. You think you have control over how you're being perceived or what surveillance means here. But data does not work like that, I think, all the time in those binaries. Like, oh, just because I put it up on Instagram, I have more control. In the same way that, oh, my mother doesn't have control over herself in the surveillance because I am choosing to. So I don't think I surveillance is surveillance is surveillance. Like, a rose is a rose is a rose in any form and which way. So I don't look at surveillance in like these binaries of what is a CCTV camera versus what is Instagram. Both of them are surveillance. But to answer the question how I would feel, I'm fine with it. Apart from like just normal, like I live alone, and I mean, if my mother is okay watching me just like roaming around
Doing your thing.
naked in my
Yeah,
apartment because I live alone, fine, let her do it. I mean, because I mean, I wouldn't mind, but it's also like, if would I be okay with somebody else watching me? Never. The
right,
same way my mother wouldn't be okay with anybody else watching her.
right.
Um, yeah, if that answers your question.
I think it does. And you know, from projections to, I just want to quickly drop that idea of like how Instagram has become kind of like your stream of consciousness. It seems, very, very often. Is that something that's kind of become facilitated because it's your communication with like your mom at the same time, and she's reading through your thoughts and like being connected with you, because it's become quite an active space for you to voice out,
Yeah,
where you are,
yeah.
in particular day, in understanding a particular medium, or general questions with the world,
Um, First, it's called branding.
right. Well done on that.
No, but honestly, I think I share a very interesting relationship with Instagram. Almost, I say relationship almost as if it's a person at this point, and like anything, because I think because I do not have and a constant access to all these people that I share, that I used to share my life with back in India. I could meet them, or anything. Instagram has become this space for me to like reach out to people, or for me to find out what is happening in people's life. And so I feel like it has become this warm space of collaboration, or for just reaching out, where like I've made so many friends, where I have had so many people reach out to me and I reached out to them, just over this mutual trust and respect that we have for each other's work. And I know there is a very tricky like um uh thing here, because I my friend, he just keeps telling me that, oh, you get all these bad like sometimes I would have some random creepy guy in my DMs being like, oh, do
Of
you
course.
want to see
Yes.
um a dick or whatever? And I'm like, and I would tell it to him, and he's just like, oh, it's because you it is because you put yourself out there so much that you're inviting it. And I'm like, that is such a it's such a victim blaming I mentality, like to assume that fine, I am putting myself out there, but I never invite harassment in that way. But like Instagram that way has become this space for me to like have a stream of consciousness, because I love um the transience of the content. Like Instagram
Right.
stories, Cheryl is having a breakdown literally on her Instagram stories, but will
Yes.
you know that in 24 hours? No, she's
No.
gonna be gone.
Right.
Yeah, she puts out a thirst trap on her Instagram stories on her main account. She looks great, but will she feel that sexy neck tomorrow? No, because she's gonna delete. So I love the transience. I love almost like an absolute child. Like I crave the attention. I want to be seen because I live alone in a country that I don't feel seen, I don't feel understood, I do not feel heard enough. Not because, like I don't talk much, but because it's a new place for me.
Instructed.
And Instagram has become like, I mostly, people follow me from home, mostly from India. And so it becomes a space where like, oh, you would know what it feels like to finally find a box of Roshagulla in New York out of
Yes.
nowhere. And I would absolutely post pictures of the food on my Instagram and make it a stream of consciousness, because I feel very connected to some of them, and not as much as others. But it has become a warm space.
Wow. Well, that's been a long journey of arriving at where you are now, and for us a small peek into understanding how that big leap has happened. We are almost nearing around 2 hours, so I think I might have to cut.
It's like I really thought I wouldn't be like now. I thought I would go back to napping or sleeping, but I'm really pumped up now. I guess this is the start of the day.
A good cup of black coffee is what's probably going to follow
But
after this.
I do not drink coffee.
What? Well, you will find your poison, or maybe you have it right on the
I
side.
don't think like drinking like alcohol in the morning is on my brand yet, but I'll get there soon.
Soon enough. We'll stalk you on Instagram and find out, right? But thanks so much, Cheryl. Thank you for really taking us through this and also like putting forward thoughts and ideas um, about where and how you're thinking about your work. You know, like you said, not everything has its perfect answers, but the joy is in kind of trying to figure it out because that's what helps you grow and evolve and change your medium and adapt to it. And we will become masters of our own voice.
I
Hopefully.
just have such a problem with the word master. I don't know why.
Master, right? Like
Yeah,
it's
I don't know. Like when somebody says master, I always assume the existence of somebody who's a subordinate, like somebody the person is a master to. And that just like I just pile
ownership of what's in that sense, you know, like such weird words to put in this. Like, what does that mean? Like, it is mine.
up.
What is ownership now?
It's 2020. Stop using the word master to describe anybody. It's problematic. It's really problematic.
Yes. You know, well, I hope the next time you meet the gentleman who wanted, or for anonymity's sake, the lady who you met, who did talk about being masters of their own mediums, they might have a different perspective towards it. Until
I hope.
then, we'll do what we do and not really give a shit about all of that, right?
Yep.
Sounds good. But thanks so much. I hope you have a
You.
great Friday and a super weekend ahead. And I'll see you soon, someday, somewhere.
I know, I know. Thank you so
We've got
much
to make
for
this happen.
putting together this whole thing. I am really thankful to everybody who sat through
Yes.
um, this entire thing for 2 hours. Like I see some familiar names, but I'm like, thank you
Nice.
so much for doing this. Thank you.
No, I'm so glad to do this, and we'll have your video along with the other artists who we've spoken to over this month by next week in place, and I think that would be amazing. If I'm able to keep track of my deadlines, right?
I hope you
So
can. I
my
hope you can. Just like remember to keep feeding yourself that middle and like keep
Oh,
hydrating.
that's going to happen for sure. Next week, we actually have an exciting week coming up ahead because we have Kosuke Okahara, who's going to be doing a takeover to talk about his process with, I mean, his relationship with photography that goes from constructing dark rooms to kind of making your own prints. And Kosuke is just coming out with his new book that we're very, very excited to talk about. All of that and more will happen next week. But today we have Cheryl, who's going to start her Friday off and end our days with this lovely conversation. So thank you and see you
Thank you
guys
so
next
much.
Friday. Thanks,
Bye.
Cheryl. Bye bye.